She selected a human to end the war, then watched him shatter armies by himself. HFY Stories. Best HFY stories in the far reaches of space. A war raged between two powerful factions, the Valari and the Zalnok. These two races had been fighting for centuries, with no end in sight. The Valari, an ancient alien species, possessed technology beyond imagination. They had vast fleets of starships and weapons that could wipe out entire planets. The Zalnok, however, were relentless and driven by a need to conquer. They would stop at nothing to control the galaxy. On a planet far from the war in the dusty plains of a world known as Earth, a man named Jackson Creed lived alone. He was a cowboy, no one special in the grand scheme of things. He spent his days working the land, tending cattle, and keeping to himself, but that would change in ways he could never have imagined. Jackson was a man of few words. He had seen much in his life, loss, hardship, and the quiet loneliness of the open plains. His family had been taken from him by space raiders when he was younger, leaving him with nothing but his trusty revolver and a heart hardened by grief. He had no interest in the stars above or the battles that raged across the galaxy. Earth was all he needed, and he wanted nothing more than to live out his life in peace. But fate had other plans. One day, as Jackson stood by the campfire, staring at the dark sky above, a strange ship descended. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, its sleek design and glowing blue lights flickering against the night. The craft landed silently on the plains, and from it, a figure emerged. The figure was tall, cloaked in shimmering armor that glinted in the firelight. Jackson instinctively reached for his revolver, but the figure held up a hand, signaling him to stop. "You are Jackson Creed," the figure said in a voice that was both calm and powerful. "You have been chosen." Jackson stared at the figure, confused and ready to bolt. "Chosen for what?" he asked, his hand still gripping the handle of his revolver. "I'm no hero, lady." The figure stepped closer, her movements graceful and deliberate. "I am the Empress of the Valari," she said. "I need your help to end a war that has torn this galaxy apart." Jackson frowned. "War? I'm no soldier. I just want to be left alone." The Empress looked at him with understanding. "You have no choice. The fate of your planet and the entire galaxy depends on you." Jackson shook his head, still not understanding. "You got the wrong man." But the Empress was insistent. "The war between the Valari and the Zalnok is destroying everything. The Valari, once proud and powerful, are on the brink of defeat. They have no hope left. The only chance of ending this war lies in the hands of someone outside their conflict, someone who can fight with the unpredictability of a human. Someone like you." Jackson was skeptical. He wasn't a soldier, and he certainly didn't want to be part of a galactic war. But the Empress's words haunted him. She spoke of Earth, the planet he loved, the place he had vowed to protect. If the war continued, Earth would be caught in the crossfire. His people would be helpless, and there would be no one left to fight for them. As the Empress explained the situation, Jackson began to understand the gravity of what was happening. The Valari had advanced technology, but their forces were stretched thin. They could no longer defend their borders, let alone stop the Zalnok from advancing. The Empress had seen Jackson's potential, his ability to think on his feet, to act without hesitation, and to outsmart his opponents. She believed he was the one who could turn the tide of the war. "You may not want this responsibility," the Empress said, "but you are the only one who can do it. You are the only one who can save your people and the galaxy." Jackson stood silently for a moment, his mind racing. He never asked for this. He never wanted to be anyone's hero. But he couldn't ignore the truth in the Empress's words. He had lost so much in his life, and now he was being given the chance to do something that could make a difference. Not just for him, but for everyone. With a heavy sigh, Jackson finally spoke. "What do I need to do?" The Empress smiled. "You will come with me. You will learn what you need to know, and I will give you the weapons you need to fight. Together we will end this war." Jackson didn't know what to expect as the Empress led him aboard her ship. It was vast, unlike anything he had ever seen. The corridors were lined with glowing panels, and the air was thick with the hum of alien technology. Jackson felt out of place, but there was no turning back now. In a private chamber, the Empress handed Jackson a weapon. It was a revolver, much like the one he had carried all his life. But this was different. The gun was made of strange alien materials, and it pulsed with energy as if it were alive. "This is the weapon of the Valari," the Empress explained. "It has the power to manipulate space itself. With it, you can bend time and distance, making you faster than any opponent." It will be your most powerful tool. Jackson held the gun in his hands, feeling the weight of it. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before, but deep down, he knew that this was his only chance. If he didn't take this step, if he didn't help the Empress, there would be no future for Earth or anyone else. I don't know if I can do this, Jackson admitted. You can, the Empress said. I believe in you, Jackson. You were chosen for a reason. As the ship soared through space, Jackson's mind raced with questions. What had he gotten himself into? He was just a cowboy. But the war was real, and the fate of millions was in his hands. He didn't have time for doubts. He had to fight, for Earth, for the galaxy, and for himself. Jackson Creed had never seen anything like the starship he now found himself aboard. The Volari ship was enormous, sleek, and filled with strange technology. As it glided through the endless expanse of space, Jackson sat in a quiet corner of the ship, gripping his revolver tightly. The weapon the Empress had given him felt heavy in his hands, but he didn't understand its power. He was just a cowboy. What could he possibly do with this? The Empress had told him he was going to fight in the war, but Jackson still didn't believe it. The thought of battling against alien forces in far-off galaxies seemed like something out of a dream, or more like a nightmare. He wasn't a soldier. He had no training. Yet, as the ship moved closer to its destination, he felt the weight of his responsibilities settle on him. He had agreed to join the Empress and fight, not for glory, but because of his love for Earth, the home he had lost so much of. If he didn't act now, the war would spread, and Earth would be next. The Volari and Zalnok had already torn apart so many planets. Earth could be their next target. The Empress appeared before him, her eyes serious, yet filled with a strange kind of hope. Jackson, she said softly, we are approaching the first battlefield. The Zalnok have set up a stronghold on the planet Veridion. It is a strategic location, and we cannot allow them to gain control. Jackson nodded slowly. What do I need to do? He didn't feel ready. But he didn't have a choice. This was what he had agreed to. You will land with my forces and make your way to their command center, the Emperor said. You'll need to destroy their communications tower, which will disrupt their command chain. The rest of the army will follow, but you must act quickly. Jackson gripped his revolver tighter, his mind racing. His whole life had been about simple things, ranching, riding horses, and living off the land. Now he was about to face an enemy army that had conquered worlds. Was he really ready for this? As the ship broke through the planet's atmosphere and began its descent, Jackson stood up. The gravity on Veridion was heavier than Earth's, but he adjusted quickly. The Empress's forces landed first, a sleek, well-trained group of Volari soldiers who moved with precision, their armor glinting under the planet's twin suns. Jackson followed, his boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt. He felt out of place, surrounded by soldiers who seemed so confident and skilled, but he didn't have time to think about that now. He had a job to do. The battlefield was chaotic. Blaster fire cracked through the air, and the sound of explosions echoed in the distance. The Zalnok were known for their relentless fighting style. They didn't care for strategy, only power and destruction. Their soldiers were monstrous, their heavy armor making them appear like walking tanks. But Jackson wasn't scared. He had faced down gangsters on Earth, men who had killed without remorse. He had seen the worst of humanity, and he knew that no matter how fierce the Zalnok were, they were still just another enemy to fight. Jackson moved quickly, his boots thudding on the ground as he followed the Volari soldiers into the fray. He didn't know exactly where the command center was, but he knew that he had to reach it if he wanted to stop the Zalnok. He trusted the Empress's plan, but a part of him wasn't sure what to expect. The air was thick with smoke as Jackson crouched behind a ruined building. The sounds of battle were all around him. He could hear the Volari soldiers firing their advanced weapons, the Zalnok responding with their own weapons that crackled with energy. But Jackson wasn't interested in fighting the foot soldiers. Not yet. He had one goal: destroy the communications tower. With his revolver in hand, Jackson sprinted toward the Zalnok's tower, ducking behind debris and walls for cover. His heart raced as he moved, but his focus was sharp. He couldn't afford to make mistakes. The fate of the battle depended on him. As he reached the base of the tower, he saw a group of Zalnok soldiers stationed outside. They didn't see him coming, and Jackson's instincts took over. He fired his revolver. The sound was different from any weapon he'd used before, a deep, echoing thrum that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. The first Zalnok soldier fell, his armor crumpling under the force of the shot. The others turned toward him, but Jackson was already moving, ducking behind cover as he fired again. Each shot was precise, his aim true. He could feel the power of the revolver coursing through him, each shot bending space and time in a way that left his enemies no chance to react. The Zalnok were fast, but Jackson was faster. They fell one by one, and he pushed forward, not stopping until he reached the entrance to the tower. Inside, the Zalnok had set up a command center, filled with strange technology and large screens. Jackson knew that destroying the tower would stop their communication and disorient the enemy forces. He planted the charges the Empress's soldiers had given him and set the timer. As he sprinted away from the tower, he glanced back. A brilliant explosion lit up the sky, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The explosion threw him to the ground, but he quickly regained his footing. The Volari soldiers cheered as they saw the tower fall. It was a victory, but Jackson knew it was just the beginning. The Zalnok would regroup, and there would be more battles ahead. But for now, they had a chance to turn the tide. As Jackson made his way back to the Volari lines, he could feel their eyes on him. The soldiers who had once looked at him with doubt now saw him as something more. He had proven himself, not just a cowboy from a forgotten planet, but a force that could change the course of the war. The Empress stood waiting for him, her gaze filled with approval. "You did it," she said softly. "You have proven that humans can change the outcome of this war." Jackson nodded, his expression serious. "This battle is over, but there's more to come." "Yes," the Empress agreed. "But you've shown the galaxy that hope is not lost. You've given us a chance." Jackson didn't feel like a hero. But as he looked out at the burning ruins of the Zalnok Command Center, he knew that he had taken the first step toward ending the war. It wasn't just about fighting anymore. It was about hope. And, for the first time in a long while, he believed in it. Jackson Creed stood on the edge of the battlefield, watching the aftermath of the explosion that had destroyed the Zalnok communications tower. The Volari forces had pushed the enemy back, and the once mighty Zalnok had been thrown into disarray. For the first time, the Volari had a real chance of winning this war. Jackson's heart still raced from the battle, but a part of him felt empty. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but it wasn't the sense of distance he now felt. The fight, the noise, the bloodshed, it all seemed so far from the world he had known on Earth. The Empress, standing nearby, noticed Jackson's silence. She had watched him from the safety of her command ship, her eyes studying his every move. He had done well, better than she had hoped. But there was more to the war than just one battle. She needed him, and she couldn't afford to lose him. "You did well, Jackson," she said softly, her voice calm, yet filled with the weight of a galaxy's worth of struggle. Jackson nodded, but the weight of the moment hung heavy. "It doesn't feel like a win," he muttered, wiping blood from his brow. "There's always more." "You're right," the Empress agreed. "The war won't end with one victory. But what you've done today gives us hope. Hope." The word echoed in Jackson's mind, but he didn't feel it. There was a nagging voice inside him telling him that this fight wasn't as simple as it seemed. He had joined the Empress to protect his home, to protect Earth. But now that he was in the middle of this war, he was beginning to question if it was really about hope, or if it was about something darker. That night, as the Volari camp celebrated their victory, Jackson couldn't sleep. He walked through the quiet camp, staring up at the stars. His revolver, which had become both his weapon and his burden, felt heavier in his hand. He had done what the Empress asked, and he had survived. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that something wasn't right. As Jackson wandered deeper into the camp, he overheard two Volari officers talking in hushed voices. He didn't mean to listen, but the words that reached his ears made his blood run cold. "It's all falling apart," one of the officers said, glancing nervously around. "The Empress, she wants to drag this war on forever. It's not about saving the galaxy. It's about control." Jackson froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The officer's words rang in his ears. Control? Was that what this was all about? Had the Empress used him, a simple human, as a pawn in a larger game? He couldn't believe it, but doubt began to creep into his mind. He needed answers. As the officers continued their conversation, Jackson learned something that made his stomach churn. The Empress's inner circle had been planning to betray her, to stop the war and claim power for themselves. The rebellion wasn't coming from the Zalnok. It was coming from within the Volari ranks. The officers had decided they would end the war by their own terms, using Jackson as the distraction while they seized control. Jackson's mind raced. He had fought for these people, believing in their cause. But now it seemed that the Volari weren't the heroes he had imagined. They were as ruthless as the Zalnok they fought against. Jackson knew what he had to do. The Empress needed to know the truth, even if it meant confronting the people who had trusted him to fight their battles. He had been used, but that didn't mean he couldn't stop it. The next morning, Jackson made his way to the Empress's command center. The guards stood at attention as he entered, but they didn't stop him. He was one of them now. He found the Empress standing by a large window looking out at the battlefield below. She turned as he entered. "Jackson," she said, her voice warm but guarded. "You've done well. Your actions have turned the tide of this war. We will push forward and the Zalnok will be defeated." Jackson shook his head, his mind clouded with anger. "I overheard something last night. The officers, they're planning to betray you. They want to end the war on their own terms. They're using me as a distraction while they take control." The Empress's expression remained calm, but her eyes narrowed. You must be mistaken," she said, though there was a tremor in her voice. "The officers are loyal to me." "They're not," Jackson replied, his voice firm. "They want to take control of the Valari Empire. You're not fighting for peace. You're fighting for power." The Empress stared at him for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. "You've seen the truth, haven't you?" she said softly. "I was hoping you wouldn't." Jackson was taken aback. "You knew?" "I knew," she replied, her voice cold. But there was no other way. The war could not end without the galaxy in chaos. The Valari need to maintain control, or the Zalnok will rise again. The galaxy will fall apart without order. Jackson took a step back, his heart sinking. "It's about power. You've been using me." "I have," the Empress admitted, "but not in the way you think. You were chosen because of your humanity, because you can fight without the constraints of our politics. You fight for what's right, even if you don't fully understand the cost. I need someone like you." Jackson clenched his fists. "I didn't sign up for this," he said, his voice low with anger. "I'm just a cowboy. I was trying to save my people, not fight for a throne." The Empress sighed, turning away from him. "And now you know the truth. There is no easy answer, Jackson. The war must end, but not without sacrifice." Jackson felt a cold rage wash over him. He had been used, not just by the Empress, but by everyone who had manipulated the situation for their own gain. The galaxy was no different from Earth. There was always a battle for power, and the people who fought didn't care about the cost. But Jackson wasn't going to let that happen. He had his own code, and he wasn't going to let the Valari or the Zalnok win. If he was going to fight, it wouldn't be for anyone's power. It would be to stop the war once and for all. Turning on his heel, Jackson left the Empress's command center. There was no more trust, no more hope. Only one thing remained. He would bring the war to an end, no matter the cost. The war had gone on for too long. What had begun as a fight for survival had become a battle for control, a power struggle that threatened the very future of the galaxy. Jackson Creed had been thrust into a conflict he never asked for, but now he was determined to end it. No more lies, no more manipulation. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a force that could change everything. He had learned the truth about the Empress and her goals. She wasn't fighting to save the galaxy. She was fighting to keep the Valari Empire intact. And Jackson, though unwilling, had become her weapon in this endless war. But Jackson wasn't about to let her or anyone else control his fate. He had a plan now, a plan to put an end to the war once and for all. The Empress had not expected Jackson's defiance. After their conversation, she had let him go, not realizing that he was no longer her ally. Jackson's mission was now clear. He would face the final battle, not for the Valari, nor for the Zalnok, but for the galaxy and for Earth. Jackson had learned of a massive Zalnok stronghold on the planet Shora. It was heavily fortified in their last remaining command center. The Zalnok had gathered their forces for a final push to crush the Valari once and for all. If they succeeded, the war would be over, and the galaxy would fall under Zalnok rule. The Empress had intended to strike first, but Jackson knew this was his moment. It was time to make things right. He would destroy the Zalnok stronghold, not for victory, but for the chance of peace, for everyone. He had to act before the Empress's forces did. He set out alone, leaving the Valari behind. He couldn't trust them anymore. They had their own agenda. Jackson didn't need them. He had his own way of fighting. The journey to Shora was quick, thanks to the Empress's ships, which Jackson had taken for his own use. As the planet grew larger in the viewports, Jackson prepared himself for what was ahead. He wasn't just facing Zalnok soldiers. He was facing an empire's final stand. Jackson's ship touched down in the heart of the Zalnok stronghold. The ground was dark and barren, the remnants of past battles scattered across the land. There was no life here, only war. Jackson's boots hit the dirt with a heavy thud as he exited the ship, the cold wind whipping at his face. His revolver was strapped to his side and his eyes were sharp. He had come to end this no matter what it took. The Zalnok soldiers were everywhere, guarding the massive base. They didn't know Jackson was coming. They had underestimated him, and now they would pay the price. Jackson moved like a shadow through the wreckage of the battlefield, blending in with the dark terrain. He didn't need a full army. He was all he needed. Quietly, he made his way toward the main entrance of the stronghold. As he approached the gates, 2 Zalnok soldiers stood guard, talking to each other. Without hesitation, Jackson fired his revolver. The first soldier fell without a sound, and the second barely had time to react before he too crumpled to the ground. Jackson moved swiftly, taking cover behind a pile of metal debris as he checked his surroundings. The stronghold was heavily guarded, but he knew the plan. He had studied the layout of the base during his flight. The core of the stronghold was just ahead. That's where the Zalnok's leader, General Karok, was waiting. Jackson knew that if he took down Karok, the entire Zalnok force would fall apart. It was a bold move, but it was the only way to end the war. As he neared the center, the air grew thicker, the sound of blaster fire and explosions echoing in the distance. This was the heart of the conflict, and it was about to come to an end. Jackson moved through the corridors of the base, using the shadows to his advantage. His revolver, with its mysterious alien power, made him unstoppable. He could bend space, make himself faster, and strike harder than anyone had ever expected. The Zalnok soldiers never stood a chance. One by one, they fell, and Jackson continued forward, his goal clear in his mind. Finally, Jackson reached the main command center where General Karok stood surrounded by his officers. The general was a towering figure, his armor gleaming with dark energy. He had led the Zalnok for years, and his forces had devastated planet after planet. Now his forces were crumbling, and Jackson had come to finish what he had started. Karok turned as Jackson entered, his eyes narrowing. "You," he growled. "The human who dares to challenge us?" Jackson didn't say a word. He simply raised his revolver and fired. The shot ripped through the air, striking Karok in the chest. But the general wasn't dead. He staggered back, the armor protecting him from the full force of the blast. Jackson didn't wait. He fired again, this time targeting Karok's exposed side. The general let out a roar of pain, but still he refused to fall. "You're nothing but a tool," Karok spat. "The Valerie used you, just as I will. You are a puppet in this war, nothing more." Jackson's eyes hardened as he took a step forward. "I'm no one's puppet," he said coldly. "I'm ending this war my way." He fired again, and this time the shot went straight through Karok's armor, piercing his heart. The general fell, lifeless, to the ground. With Karok's death, the last of the Zalnok's will to fight crumbled. The soldiers who had been loyal to him now looked lost, confused. Jackson could feel the shift in the air. The war was over. The Zalnok had no leader left. They could no longer continue their crusade. But the war wasn't truly over. Not yet. As Jackson turned to leave the command center, his comm unit buzzed. It was the Empress. "Jackson," she said, her voice calm but filled with a strange tension. "You've done it. You've stopped Karok. The Zalnok forces are in disarray. The galaxy is safe." Jackson stood still for a moment, his hand on the comm unit. "No," he said firmly. "The war is only over when it's over. The galaxy is still broken, and it's up to us to fix it." The Empress was silent for a moment. "You don't understand," she replied, her voice colder now. "The Valari are in control. We can end this the way it was always meant to be done." Jackson shook his head. "Not like this. I won't let you keep playing this game of power. The galaxy needs something different." With that, he turned off the comm and walked out of the stronghold, his boots echoing in the empty halls. The war was over, but the battle for peace had just begun. Jackson had ended the fighting, but now he had to help rebuild, to make sure that the galaxy wouldn't fall into another endless cycle of control and manipulation. He had become the one thing the Empress never expected, a force of change.